Hey adventurers, so today is going to be another book review. This is going to be for That Hideous Strength by C.S. Lewis. I've still got the green sticker on there. I need to get that off, but I don't want to damage the cover too much, so I'll work on that later. Anyways, this is the third book in his Space Trilogy. This is sci-fi, Arthuriana, Christianity and spiritual warfare. There's definitely a theological discussion going on here through the story that's being told and stuff like that. And yeah, I have some thoughts on it. That Hideous Strength is the third and final book in C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy. Though its setup and the tale it is telling is actually quite a bit different than the first two books in the series. We are not traveling with Ransom to another planet or exploring a new world. Instead, we are seeing how those things that we've been learning about in the first two books affect our own world, affect Earth. Before I get into the main body of this review, though, I just quickly like to say welcome to an Erudite Adventure. I'm T. If you're liking what you're seeing from us, please like, comment, and subscribe. So I definitely went into this book with the wrong expectations. I thought this was going to be more similar to the first two books, and was definitely surprised by the change in form for this book. In many ways, though, I actually thought that worked really well, that we had that change from the first two books and we weren't following that same format. And throughout the book, I did find myself a bit more engaged due to not knowing exactly what to expect next. But I also wanted to continue following the journey of this character that we'd already met, the Ransom's journey. I wanted to see more of his story and what was going on there. When he is finally reintroduced into this story, he is different. He almost feels no longer human, as if he's something more. And he kind of fulfills the archetype, the archetype of like the wise mentor to the rest of our characters. He's been through it and he's seen it all before, and that comes through in his in the person that he is now in this series. And it kind of feels like that development has gone on off screen a little bit, off the page in between books 2 and 3, but it also makes sense with the story that's being told, because we're not getting it from Ransom's perspective this time. We're getting it from other people looking at Ransom, and so it works in my opinion. It was also fun for me to see Lewis bringing in some stuff from Arthurian legend, with Merlin being the prime example, but he also in a way does a retelling of the Once and Future King storyline, which is kind of interesting that Lewis works that in here in the way that he does. Not the book so much, meaning the book by T.H. White, but the storyline of Arthur returning during Britain's greatest hour of need, that storyline itself. And so he does kind of work that in here, and that's kind of fun to see for me as a fan of Arthurian literature. I think some people will get the wrong idea from that. It's not that Lewis is telling that story, but rather he's using and referring to it more thematically than actually telling the events of that story. This book is also the most theological of the trilogy, at least I feel like it was, and deals the most directly with spiritual warfare on Earth and how it can manifest. As I believe I said about each of the other books, I don't always agree with Lewis's theology or the answers that he comes up with, but I do really appreciate the questions that he's asking and the way that he asks them, and the fact that he allows himself to ask a question, and through the telling of this story he comes to an answer. Whether or not that's the answer that he believes or agrees with doesn't so much matter as him coming to an answer by telling a story, which I think is an important thing to understand, is that storytelling can be more than just entertainment. And so yeah, let's see what else I have written here. But I do really appreciate the questions that he is asking, and the fact that he is searching out potential answers by telling a story about it and seeing where it leads him. It's something that I admire and appreciate a ton, and it's something that I find myself doing more and more, even after having read more Lewis. And before that I did that, but I do it even more now, and it's just something that I've found myself doing more and more continually as I can continue my erudite adventure, as it were. This book is also weird, at least to me. I found it kind of weird. This feels like a Bradbury short story in a lot of ways, and just brings in some strange, weird things into the story that's going on. But they're used as an illustration for the spiritual warfare that is going on, and so I was able to accept them in that way and understand what Lewis was doing with them. But it is the most strangeness that I've seen from Lewis by far. I think the only other one that would come close would be The Silver Chair, which is another book that interestingly is not my favorite of the Narnia books. The last thing I want to bring up about this book is the ending. That's kind of an important thing to talk about with books a lot of times. And I'm not going to spoil it or anything like that, but it is weird. In some ways, it kind of makes sense with what Lewis has been doing throughout the book, but it also just kind of feels like it comes out of nowhere. Not in that the story just ends, although that does happen as well, but just the ending that he chooses to tell with this story is unexpected to me. I didn't see that as what was being set up for, or just coming. It just kind of comes out of nowhere. And then the book does end. It does have a rather abrupt ending as well. I have talked about liking following action and time to understand this new normal, and we don't really get that, but the implication is kind of there with the way that he ends the book. And yeah, it was just an interesting ending to me. I didn't particularly care for the ending, to be honest, and that was kind of weird because I actually liked the endings of the first two books quite a bit and what was going on with them, even though they were also fairly abrupt endings. But this one just was unexpected and kind of weird to me. Overall, this probably is my least favorite of the trilogy, though I do greatly appreciate it and what Lewis was doing here. It is strange, and it forced me kind of to recontextualize what I was reading several times during the reading of the book. But that isn't necessarily a bad thing. And it's actually something that I'm more and more comfortable doing the more books that I read. The first time that really came into focus that I would need to recontextualize things was when I was reading the Giver Quartet, and I'd read the Giver and I'd read Gathering Blue, and I was like, this is so cool. I really love these books. And then I read Messenger, and I was like, that's not at all what I was expecting or wanting from this story. And it made me recontextualize the story, because I had previously been thinking of the Giver Quartet as a science fiction dystopian story, but it's with Messenger it becomes far more fantasy, and then with Sun it kind of blends those things together in some really weird ways, deals with some interesting things. It's interesting discussion for sure, but it did cause me to recontextualize what I'd read before, and usually that's the sort of thing that happens where one book will make me recontextualize what I'd read previously. Whereas this one, I was recontextualizing as I was going through the book. And that's interesting for me to do, and something that I'm glad I was able to do, and I'm glad I'm learning to be able to do. But it is something that is not terribly common, even still, with all the things that I read. Anyways, that is my review of That Hideous Strength by C.S. Lewis, the last part of the conclusion of the celebrated Space Trilogy, which begins in Out of the Silent Planet and continues in Paralandra. So I'm glad that I finished this. I'm glad that I was able to complete a series. I'm glad that I was able to read more Lewis and learn more about what he's doing with his writings and stuff like that. He's not a favorite author of mine, but I do appreciate him a lot, and I definitely have my own opinions of Lewis that are probably different than most people's, but I am happy to have read this book, and I'm glad to have done it. I have The Dark Tower and other stories by him as well, and it sounds like the Dark Tower, the short story The Dark Tower, might have something to do with the Space Trilogy to some degree, and so I'm very interested in reading that and seeing how that ties in, or if it ties in, or what was meant by that comment that I heard about it. So anyways, I want to get to this at some point. That's just completely an aside that doesn't really factor into this review, though. Thank you guys for watching an Erudite Adventure. We post videos every Monday and Thursday, and have our social medias linked in the description down below. We will see you guys again soon. Stay warm.